Oh, how wonderfully our superiors assured us this would go. Just grab one of those primitive bipeds from the blue planet, they said. Study it for a few cycles, then return it none the wiser, they said. The words echoed in my thoughts as I replayed the memory of Admiral Crin's briefing, her 4 eyes blinking in that irritating sequential pattern. She favored when feeling particularly superior. Your team has been selected for a first contact biological study, she announced, with smug authority. My cranial ridges flushed purple with pride. This was the kind of assignment that defined careers. Thank you, Admiral. Which species will we be evaluating? A flick of her upper appendage, and the hologram shimmered into existence. A curious creature, 2 legs, 2 arms, 1 head, soft exterior, with patches of fur only on its upper section. They call themselves humans, Prin said, the word dripping with condescension. 3rd rock from an unimpressive yellow star. They have only just mastered combustion engines. No warp capability, no energy weapons. Their most advanced devices are barely more complex than our waste recyclers. I circled the projection, analyzing the frail-looking figure. Their skeletal structure is internal, I remarked with thinly veiled disdain, completely backwards from an evolutionary standpoint. Prin's laughter wheezed like a punctured air bladder. Exactly, no armor, no claws. No significant strength or speed. Dull senses. Lifespan under a century pitifully short. Their entire species barely crawled out of its gravity well. I recorded every word, already planning my report. And our objective? Simple, Prin said. Extract 1 specimen. Preferably a solitary adult from a remote location. Conduct a full biological and psychological evaluation, wipe its memory, and return it to its environment. Standard protocol. Any particular type? Analysts suggest what they call a hiker or camper 1 who isolates themselves voluntarily. The process should be clean and uneventful. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction, a straightforward assignment, practically a vacation. How utterly naive that thought would prove to be. I summoned my team to the operations chamber. Nevik, our biology specialist, stoic as ever, already muttering through possible dissection sequences. Traz, the security officer, her armor plates gleaming as she flexed her forelimbs like this was a combat mission instead of a glorified field trip. And Mila, my newest recruit, young and bright-eyed, eager to prove her worth in her first deep space deployment. These humans, I told them, projecting the hologram again, are as fragile as larvae. No armor, minimal intelligence and technology. So primitive, it borders on comedic. Our surveillance shows a preference for consuming fermented liquids and staring at flickering light displays. There will be no resistance. Yet their broadcasts suggest violent tendencies, Traz rumbled, a hint of eagerness in her tone. Dramatizations? I scoffed. Fiction designed to amuse their primitive minds. Real humans freeze in fear when confronted with the unknown. Still, Nevik interjected quietly, we should follow standard containment measures. Of course, I said, waving him off. But trust me, this is routine. 6 of their days later, we reached orbit. Cloaked and silent, we hovered unseen above their blue and green world. The irony? We could have arrived with sirens blaring, and they would have blamed it on what they call weather balloons. Our scans quickly found an ideal target in a region known as Montana. Mountains, rivers, sparse population perfect for a clean extraction. There, Traz announced as the image resolved. A human male seated beside a flowing body of water, rod in hand, apparently engaged in a ritual they call fishing. Average. Build, light brown fur on the head, simple earth-toned coverings. Isolated, unaware, utterly defenseless. Perfect, I said, barely masking my impatience. Activate paralysis beam, level 2. We don't want damage. The beam lanced down in a brilliant column of azure. One moment, the human was gazing at ripples on the water. The next, he was suspended midair, his primitive tools abandoned on the riverbank. 90 seconds later, he lay in Containment Chamber 3, as docile as a preserved specimen. It was almost disappointing how easy it had been. Traz grumbled about wasted potential for combat. Nevik was already preparing his instruments, and Miley hummed softly as she set up psychological protocols. I stepped to the observation window, drinking in the sight of the first human ever captured by the Concordat. History was unfolding under my command. My name would be etched in the annals of science for centuries. Our first human subject. I whispered, savoring the words. How proud I was then. How naive. The first thing I noticed was how quickly the paralysis began to fade. That shouldn't have been possible. Level 2 fields were calibrated to immobilize far larger, far more resilient species predators with hide thicker than ship hull plating. Yet the human's fingers twitched only moments after we secured him in the containment chamber. Then, his chest rose, fell, rose again in a rhythm far too steady for someone recently plucked from his planet and stripped of control. Recovery time. Anomalously fast, Nevik murmured, his voice tight with curiosity as he scrolled through his datapad. Neural activity spiking higher than expected baselines. I brushed aside the unease creeping through my limbs. Residual reflex, irrelevant. Through the observation window, the human blinked awake. Two blue eyes, startling in their clarity, opened and fixed on the sterile walls. His gaze shifted, methodical, not frantic. Not the wild panic I had anticipated. His breathing quickened slightly, but then slowed, steady like a predator scenting the wind. Begin audio feed, I ordered. The translator lattice hummed softly. As it synchronized with his speech centers, he moved with unhurried precision, rising from the platform without stumbling. I watched, frozen, as he crossed the chamber, stopping a mere arm's length from the one-way barrier that separated us. For a heartbeat, those blue eyes seemed to pierce through the reflective glass and find mine. Then he spoke, calm, controlled, a tone that made my cranial ridges stiffen. I know you're watching, he said. And just so we're clear, this is a bad idea you've got going here. My grip tightened on the edge of the console. That wasn't fear. That was certainty. Specimen, I began, forcing authority into my tone. You have been relocated temporarily for scientific evaluation. No harm will come to you. Cooperate, and you will be returned to your habitat with your memory sanitized. The human's lips curled upward, a gesture I recognized from cultural study files. A smile, but this one wasn't friendly. It was a predator's grin in a species that shouldn't have any. Tanner, he said, tapping his chest lightly. Not specimen, Tanner read, and here's a fun fact, you won't get my cooperation. Not today, not ever. Traz bristled beside me, her armored limbs flexing with anticipation. Permission to enter and subdue, she growled. Denied, I snapped. It's bluff and bravado, nothing more. I turned back to the window, though unease prickled across my dermal ridges like frostbite. The human Tanner shifted his weight, leaning casually against the wall, as if we were two beings in conversation at an orbital cafe rather than captor and captive. You think you've got this under control, he continued, voice steady as the hum of our engines. You don't. You've made a mistake. I forced a laugh, brittle and sharp. You vastly overestimate your position. Do I? His head tilted slightly, and his eyes glinted like cold stars. You picked the wrong guy. Behind me, Mila whispered. Lead researcher. The containment metrics are fluctuating. Microvariances across the field grid. Compensate, I ordered, my voice harsher than intended. She nodded quickly, fingers dancing across her console, but the chill in my secondary stomach remained. Through the glass, Tanner smiled again, wider this time, showing his teeth. "Nice setup you've got here," he said softly. "Looks solid. Bet you think it's escape-proof." Traz snarled a laugh. "That chamber could hold a creature 10 times his strength and twice his intelligence." Tanner's smile deepened, and he whispered something that made the ambient hum of the lab sound suddenly louder, heavier, oppressive. "You know what humans do best?" He paused, eyes glittering. "Adapt." I told myself it was meaningless, a psychological tactic, a desperate attempt to assert control. Yet as the lights above flickered, just once, like the blink of a dying star, I felt the first real tendril of doubt coil around my mind that our models predicted docility, compliance, fear. But this human? This human was watching, calculating, planning. And in that moment, though I could not yet see the shape of it, I knew this. The balance of power had begun to shift. We had captured a man from a world we thought was fragile. And for the first time since the mission began, I wondered if we were the ones who were truly in the cage. Asterisk. The chamber lights steadied, but the silence that followed pressed against my skin like cold vacuum. I told myself the flicker was nothing more than a power fluctuation, a trivial variance in energy distribution. But the thought felt hollow as I stared at the human sitting calmly on the examination platform, his eyes fixed on the observation window with an expression that was anything but defeated. "Proceed with initial scans," I ordered, my voice clipped. "Non-invasive protocols only." Nevik adjusted the instruments with mechanical precision, but I could see the stiffness in his joints, the way his secondary fingers trembled when they brushed the console. He had seen the microvariants Millet reported. He was too cautious not to have noticed. Overhead, the scanning array descended, glimmering arcs of light forming a halo above Tanner's head. He didn't flinch, didn't even glance upward. Instead, he leaned back on his elbows and let his gaze sweep the room as if cataloging every seam, every junction, every hidden panel. "Fancy toys," Tanner murmured, voice carrying easily through the audio feed. "You want to see what makes me tick, right? Figure out how the monkey works?" His tone was casual, almost conversational, but underneath there was steel. "Go ahead. I'm curious too. Your cooperation is appreciated, but not required." I said coldly, "The process will continue regardless." "Well, fair enough." He lay down, folding his hands behind his head as though preparing for a nap. "Just so you know, though you really should have picked someone else." Something sharp twisted in my gut. "Why is that?" Tanner smiled again, teeth flashing white under the sterile lights. "Because until about 3 years ago, I was part of a military unit that specialized in escape and evasion, breaking out of places a lot tougher than this." His gaze slid toward the ceiling-mounted instruments, then back to the wall lingering on the panels, concealing our ventilation systems. "Now I run a private firm. We get paid to break security systems that people swear can't be broken." Traz gave a low, vibrating growl. "He lies," she spat, but there was a trace of uncertainty in the undertone of her voice. "Check Earth's rudimentary data nets," I snapped, masking the tight coil of unease wrapping around me. "Verify his claims." But even as I said it, I knew it would take time, and time felt suddenly very precious. "Starting scan sequence," Nevik announced. His voice was thin, stretched like a cable about to snap. Energy fields shimmered around Tanner, blue arcs dancing across his body as the instruments whispered their readings into our core systems. That was when it happened. The lights dimmed just slightly, just enough for every dermal ridge on my body to stiffen. Mila's console spat a warning glyph in violent crimson. "Power fluctuation," she said quickly, too quickly. "Compensating now." "Source?" I demanded. "Unknown." It It looks like a feedback surge, but localized to the chamber interface. Is the scan compromised? Nevik asked, his voice tight with more than scientific curiosity now. It was fear. No, Mila said. But her voice cut off as her screen flickered, glyphs tumbling like dying stars before stabilizing. Reset complete. Through it all, Tanner lay perfectly still, the faint hum of the scanners washing over him like a lullaby. When the array retracted, he opened his eyes slowly and smiled, not the mocking grin from before, but something colder, sharper. The smile of a predator who knows the hunt has already begun. Appreciate the tour, he said softly. Picked up a lot while your toys were humming. I leaned closer to the comm. Explain? He shrugged. Insurance policy. While you were poking around in my biology, I was getting a read on yours. This ship of yours? Pretty sophisticated. But you made one mistake. His voice dropped, quiet as a blade sliding free of its sheath. You connected me to your system. That's not possible, Nevik hissed. The scanner interface is one way. Tanner tilted his head, and for an instant, I swore those blue eyes glittered like coded light. One way for you, for me. Just another puzzle. Before I could respond, alarm shrieked a single rising note that turned the air metallic in. My lungs. Mila's voice broke through the din. Lead researcher something accessed the primary network during the scan. A breach lasting 3.8 seconds. My heart's froze. In the containment chamber. Tanner sat up, calm as still water. You wanted to know what humans do best? His smile was back now, sharp as a fracture line in glass. Adapt and plan ahead. The lights flickered again, longer this time. Emergency glyphs blazed across every console in the lab. Bulkhead seals groaned as the lockdown protocols began to cascade through the ship. I heard Traz curse softly, a sound that carried more fear than rage. And as the alarms keened like dying stars, a truth settled over me like the weight of a collapsing world. The human was no longer our prisoner. We were his. Asterisk, the alarm screamed, drowning out the steady hum that had once defined our control. Red glyphs cascaded across every surface like fresh blood seeping through cracks. Mila's fingers flew over the console, but her motions were frantic now, not precise. Her voice shook when she spoke. I've got systems falling offline: navigation, propulsion, partial comm blackout. Stabilize. I barked, though my throat felt dry as scorched dust. I can't. Her tone cracked like brittle glass. Through the chaos, Tanner's voice came calm, measured, a steady current slicing through the storm. Relax. Life support's fine. I'm not trying to kill you. The words slithered through the comm like a predator's whisper. Traz spun toward the containment chamber, her armor plates clicking into battle configuration, weapon deploying with a satisfying snarl of machinery. Enough. She growled. Let me in. I'll tear him apart before. Stand down, I snapped. But even as the order left my mouth, I knew it was meaningless. The door wouldn't open. The security glyph glared an angry crimson. Lockdown engaged. Explain yourself, I shouted into the audio feed. What did you do? Tanner sat cross-legged on the platform now, perfectly at ease, his voice carrying the casual tone of a man discussing weather patterns rather than orchestrating the unmaking of our ship. What did I do? Just leveled the playing field. Pause, deliberate, and suffocating. Also, I should probably mention something important. Speak. I've already sent the message. My dermal ridges went cold. For a moment, the alarm seemed to fade beneath the pounding of my 4 hearts. That's not possible, I said, though the words felt fragile even to my own auditory nodes. You've been under observation since extraction. No devices. No, Tanner chuckled. The sound was low, humorless, the kind of laugh you hear before the trap springs shut. You really don't understand us, do you? We don't rely on gear. We plan ahead. Behind me, Traz snarled. He lies. Primitive. Species can't. Check your long-range sensors, Tanner interrupted, voice cutting through hers like a blade through soft alloy. Right now. I'll wait. I shot a glance at Traz. For the first time since I'd known her, her eyes held something alien to her nature. Hesitation. Do it. I ordered. She pivoted to the auxiliary console and keyed in the commands. The glyphs streamed across the display, then froze. Her pupils constricted. Lead researcher. Her voice carried a strain I had never heard before. Multiple human vehicles converging on the extraction site. They're scanning for anomalies. My hands curled into claws. Pre-warp species shouldn't have. I told you, Tanner said softly. You grabbed the wrong guy. I stared at the observation window, the opaque reflection of my own horrified face overlaying the human's calm, infuriatingly calm figure. What are you? I whispered. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes burning like the heart of a newborn star. Prepared, he said simply. See, after a few too many people disappeared in the woods, some of us started asking questions. We built contingencies, dead man systems. If I don't check in, alarms go off, and the people I work with, they don't just come looking, they come ready. Nevik staggered toward me, datapad clutched in trembling hands. Lead researcher. He rasped. The breach during the scan, it wasn't just an anomaly. He accessed our primary network. That's impossible. Traz roared, though her voice cracked with something very close to fear. Impossible. Tanner repeated, the word tasting like mockery on his tongue. You think in walls and gates. We think in patterns. Your scanner was my doorway. Binaries. Still binary. Vesic doesn't matter if it's written in your language or mine. The lights flickered again, then plunged into emergency crimson. Bulkheads groaned as ship-wide lockdown cascaded, sealing compartments one by one. Lead researcher. Mila's scream sliced through the chaos. Propulsion offline. Navigation offline. Weapons disabled. Tanner rose slowly, stretching as if waking from a nap, his silhouette cutting a jagged shadow against the crimson glow. His voice when it came was cold, deliberate, every syllable a hammer striking the thin shell of our illusions. Here's how this works, he said. Option 1, you return me to Earth, unharmed, with my memories intact. Option 2, he smiled, and the temperature in the lab seemed to plummet. You find out how dangerous a cornered human can be. The alarms wailed louder, the sound almost organic now, a keening dirge for the arrogance we had worn like armor. And in that moment, as Tanner's gaze locked with mine through layers of glass and protocol, I understood the truth with a clarity that hollowed me to my bones. We hadn't captured a specimen. We had set loose a storm. The crimson alarms pulsed like a heartbeat in the walls, slow and steady mocking us. The chamber door stayed sealed, glyphs glaring in stubborn defiance of every override Mila attempted. Sparks spat from her console as another circuit burned. Out with a hiss of ozone. Containment protocols aren't responding. She cried, voice brittle as fractured crystal. Cut the power to the lab section. I snapped, claws scraping the edge of the console. Starve the network. Force a reset. I've tried, Mila whispered. The commands, they're not ours anymore. Before the silence could devour us, his voice came again, calm, smooth, devastating. Don't strain yourselves. Your systems aren't broken. They're optimized. The sound of him speaking like that measured, certain unraveled something deep inside me. I moved closer to the observation window, my reflection a warped shadow beside the human sitting. In perfect composure, he wasn't breathing hard. No signs of adrenal panic, no trembling, no wide-eyed confusion. He looked like a man sipping tea while the universe burned. "What do you want, human?" I demanded. "Tanner," he corrected softly. "Names matter, and what I want." He rose with the slow grace of a predator, uncurling from the grass. "Is for you to understand the stakes." He walked to the far wall, laid his hand against it as if feeling the pulse of the ship. When he spoke again, it was almost gentle, like a teacher guiding a stubborn student toward enlightenment. "You think you're explorers, scientists, that this was just another grab and go. But you miscalculated. See, a few years back, some of us started wondering why certain disappearances didn't add up. Hunters, climbers, soldiers, people who didn't scare easy." I felt the air grow heavier, the hum of life support loud in my ears. "We built systems," Tanner continued. "Fail-safes. Networks that activate if one of us vanishes without a trace. You thought you'd snatch me from a river and no one would notice? My team knew the second my signal cut out." Traz snarled, forcing her fear behind jagged armor. "Primitive bluff. Your kind can't. Check your sensors," Tanner cut. His voice soft, lethal. "I didn't want to. Stars helped me. I didn't want to." But my claws moved anyway, dragging commands across the console. And there it was docked multiple contacts. Dozens of human vehicles circling the extraction point. A web of signals lacing the terrain like molten threads. Not random, not frantic. Coordinated. Hunting. They're just ground units. Traz spat, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "No," Evik whispered, eyes wide as twin moons. "There's more. Orbital reflections, anomalies near their satellites. Patterns we missed before." I stared at the display. Objects blooming across our sensor grid, like a sudden sickness shapes, hiding in asteroid shadows, signals flickering behind their moon, stations disguised as debris. "That's impossible," I breathed. "Pre-warp species can't deploy. Defense web. They can't." "Can't?" Tanner's laugh rolled through the calm like distant thunder. "You've been looking at us wrong from the start. While you were watching our reality shows and laughing at our tech, we were watching you. Learning. Preparing." The emergency lighting washed him in crimson as he stepped close to the glass, voice dropping into something colder than void. "You thought humans were weak because we let you think so." The glyphs across my console spasmed as new commands overrode mine. On the main screen, our star chart rippled and reformed, a wide swath of space bleeding red around the Sol system. A glyph flashed in Concord Standard, a warning code older than our empire. "Exclusion zone. Lethal response Pia rotio." My claws froze midder. What is this?" Tanner tilted his head, eyes glinting like forged steel. "That, Vazik, is your parting gift. Any vessel crossing into our backyard without permission, consider it a suicide run." Behind me, Nevik made a strangled sound. He's rewriting galactic navigation markers from inside our core." I could barely hear him. My gaze was locked on the figure in the chamber one human against. An empire. And somehow, in this moment, I knew which side held the blade. "You don't have the firepower to enforce this," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Don't we?" Tanner smiled a quiet, merciless curve of lips. "Check again." And we did. And what we saw shattered 10,000 years of certainty. Orbital platforms, ghosting into active signatures. Cold shapes stirring behind distant moons. Fleets that shouldn't exist powering up like giants roused from slumber. It wasn't a bluff. It was a message carved into the dark. Humanity had teeth. "You have two choices," Tanner said softly as the ship groaned under his command. "Leave now and tell your people what you learned, or stay and find out why nobody who underestimates us lives long enough to do it twice." The alarm screamed like dying stars. And for the first time since we left the cradle of our world, I felt something I had never known, not on battlefields. Not in the silence of deep space. I felt fear. Asterisk, the hum of our engines fell silent. For one terrible instant, the ship floated as though it had died, adrift in the cold cradle of space. Then the controls lit up not under Mila's hands, not under mine, but with a rhythm that pulsed like a heartbeat, not our own. Course plotted. Navigation sealed. Engines spooled up with a roar that trembled through the decks like a predator flexing its claws. I didn't authorize that. I snarled, slamming commands into the console. Glyphs flashed back in crimson. Access denied. Across the observation window, Tanner watched me with that same unbearable calm, arms folded loosely across his chest. A man in a cage that was no longer a cage at all. Your ship's going home, he said softly. I locked in a return vector to the edge of your territory. Once I'm clear, you'll leave the Sol system and never come back. Impossible, Traz growled, her mandibles twitching with rage she could barely contain. You think you can dictate terms to us? We are the Concordat. You were, Tanner interrupted, his voice cutting through hers like a knife through thin alloy. Here, you're just tourists who didn't read the warning signs. The main screen flared to life without command input. External view, Earth, a blue and white jewel spinning silently below. And beyond it shapes, rising from the void like ghosts, shrugging off their graves. Dozens, hundreds. Orbital platforms uncoiling like steel serpents. Hulks of black metal stirring from behind moons, their hulls glimmering with patterns no Concord engineer had ever seen. My mouth went dry. Those are weapons arrays. Mila's voice cracked. Those are fleets. You've been watching us for years, Tanner said, stepping close to the glass, his eyes twin embers in the crimson gloom. And we've been watching you. Every move, every pattern. You thought we were still crawling out of our gravity well. What you didn't see, what we made sure you didn't see, is what happens when we prepare for the impossible. The coms crackled, hijacked without effort, and his voice filled every corridor of the ship, echoing down its bones. Attention, Concord vessel. This is Tanner Reed, citizen of Earth. You came here uninvited. You took without asking. That ends. Now. Through the viewport, one of the black hulks rotated, and for a moment I glimpsed the faint red gleam of something monstrous awakening, a barrel, long as a city, splitting open like the eye of a god. Power readings spiked across our sensors, climbing into ranges no known fusion drive could match. Sweet void, Nevik whispered. They're centuries ahead of projection models. How? How did they? Tanner answered without being asked. Adaptation. That's what we do best. Some of us came back changed, with knowledge, stories you'd never believe. You think you're the first to take one of us? His smile returned, sharp as fractured ice. You're not, but you'll be the last. The pod bay cycled with a hiss. Our own security seals peeled open like paper under his command. A sleek shuttle detached from our hull, gliding out into the black like a silver knife. On the display, it arced toward the waiting planet, a tiny spark in the endless dark, and then its signal winked out, swallowed by the cloak of Earth's defense net. My claws hovered over the console, trembling. This is an act of war. No, Tanner said, his voice suddenly stripped of humor, grave as an epitaph. This is an act of mercy. We could have taken your ship, broken you down to atoms. Instead, I'm sending you home with a message. The star chart flared red, our galaxy bleeding across the screen. A vast zone blinked into being around Sol, pulsing with a glyph older than empires. Class X absolute INT and then came the final warning. Encoded in flawless Concord standard. Enter this space and die. My heart stuttered as the engines roared, hurling us toward the black between stars. The viewport shrank Earth to a bright shard, then a glimmer, then nothing at all. The alarms fell silent. All that remained was the echo of Tanner's last words, branded across every layer of my mind. You thought we were weak because we let you think so. 3 weeks later, I stood before the Science Council. The chamber throbbed with voices, a hive of disbelief and outrage. When they demanded my conclusion, I gave it without tremor, though every syllable felt like a stone in my throat. Designate Earth as a Class X restricted world, I said. Non-contact period 500 cycles minimum. If they achieve warp before then, we meet them as equals or not at all. Admiral Prynne leaned forward, all 4 eyes wide. And if they come before they are ready? I stared at the great star map sprawling across the chamber dome, my reflection fractured in its infinite points of light. Then, I said softly, pray they come as friends. In the silence of my quarters, I opened the private file Tanner had left on my data slate, a single line in perfect Concord glyphs. The universe is vast. Vosig, room enough for all of us. If you choose wisdom over pride, when you're ready to poo. Talk as equals, just ask. We'll be listening. Beneath it, in human script, a phrase that needed no translation. Until then, stay out of our backyard. And as the stars wheeled past my window, I knew one truth would haunt me for the rest of my centuries. The first human we captured was the last one we ever saw, but not the last we would hear from. Asterisk, the end.